I mean, the joke is in Silicon Valley, if you go asking for money, they'll give you advice. If you go asking for advice, they'll give you money. We actually went asking for advice, and most of the advice we got was like, "Hey, you're kind of ready for a seed investment. You should just raise some money." So we've been more than 100% doubling revenue every year since we started. Similarly with user count, and almost all of that can be traced to like word of mouth. I guess most important thing is just you actually have to listen when you talk to people about the problems they're trying to solve and what your product might be able to do, especially in the early days. Like the thing you currently built almost certainly does not solve the problem, right? The most important thing is like listen really carefully. They can describe their problem in a lot of detail and like figure out how you can help them solve their problem better.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit. Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Avery, welcome to the show.
Hi, great to be here.
So you had a massive fundraise last month. I mean, 2020, 21, maybe 22, we were seeing insane fundraisers all the time. And now with AI, we're still seeing some crazy stuff, but it's not as common, right? You raised $160 million last month. And so like it means more is I guess how I would put it. So congrats on that. And then, I guess, but you only started at like in 2019, right? Just 6 years ago. Maybe walk me through a little bit what Tailscale is, how it started in the first place.
Sure. So Tailscale as a product, the one-line description is it's a tool that lets you connect any device to any other device or any number of other devices, regardless of whether they're behind firewalls or have static IP addresses or any sort of networking skills or anything like that. So the simplest way to get started is you download it from an app store, you log in with like your Google account, and that you could do it, for example, on your phone and your laptop, right? And then if you log in with the same account on both of those two things are connected across time and space, even if they're no longer on the same physical network. And it's pretty neat. You can send photos directly from one to the other, but it doesn't do it by sending up to the cloud and back. It goes point to point direct in the internet. And so it's fun to use for free. We have a generous free plan, but it's also people end up bringing it to work to solve all their connectivity problems at work. And that's where our business model is. The way we got there was definitely not as simple as that. So we started off. We actually didn't know, me and our 3 co-founders, we didn't know what exactly we were going to build. The name came before anything else, Tailscale. It's the opposite of internet scale, by which I mean a lot of people at the time were tending to use really, really scalable stuff that's designed for serving 1 billion users, even to solve simple problems like I have an internal dashboard I want to share with my 20-person team, right? And you end up, when you use these overcomplicated solutions, most of your work ends up being setting up and rolling out these overcomplicated solutions, and a tiny fraction of your work ends up being doing the actual thing you set out to do in the first place. And so Tailscale is like, hey, all of these billion user problems have lots of people working on them. Weirdly, nobody's working on how to make simple things simple. So let's make simple things simple. And then we took that sort of starting point and we started talking to our friends, contacts, businesses, potential customers. Is like, we threw it out there. It's like, what are you doing that seems like it's more complicated than it should be?
And for context, you were like, where at the time? Like did you have another startup, a different job? And like, how did you end up here?
I left my job at Google about 6 months before that. Played video games for about 6 months to decompress.
Which game?
I played a lot of Grand Theft Auto 5.
Okay,
I found it very relaxing.
I'm a FIFA guy myself, but I remember GTA is solid. Yeah.
GTA 5 is amazing. I highly recommend it. Although I guess it's like 10 years old now. I heard GTA 6 is coming out like next year. So
oh wow,
I'm gonna have to buy a new computer to make it work probably. Anyway. So yeah, I had just left Google. One of my co-founders, David Crawshaw, had also left Google a little bit before me. And then the third co-founder, David Carney, I had worked with at my first startup. He was actually in my class in university a long, long time ago. And he had just left his startup that he had been doing a few months before that, and it was ready for his next thing. So his timing was good. But we're all in 3 different cities. It was Toronto, Montreal, and New York at the time. David Crawshaw subsequently relocated to Berkeley, California.
And you just kind of came together and all of you were just right place, right time, decided you wanted to build something and decided that this was an interesting space to kind of explore?
Yeah. I mean, I started with the name Tailscale. I'm like, somebody's got to do things that make stuff easier. And I guess the initial version was just me going around to my friends saying like, hey, I'm going to start a startup doing this. What do you think? And some people are like, yeah, good for you. You do that. And the two Davids were like, oh, this sounds really interesting. Can I join you? Right. And so once we had the three of us, that's when we went off searching for like, what are we going to build?
Yeah, dive deeper into that phase of it, like finding, a lot of the startup stuff is around what you do after you have like the idea. And in your case, you had a high level idea, but you didn't have the specifics of what that might truly look like. Dive deep into how those first few weeks or months, whatever long it took, once you had those co-founders, what sort of steps you took to figure out what the kind of first problem you might solve could be.
So I guess a lot of people want to start a startup based on like, I think we should build X. And I guess that works for them. It's never been my way of doing it. And I've done a few startups in the past with varying levels of success. Tailscale is certainly the most successful one so far. I like to start with a problem or a group of people that have a problem. And like, okay, we are going to do something that thoroughly solves this problem that I can tell people have. Or I'm going to do something that makes life better for like this group of people trying to do things. Right. And when you do that, you have to maintain a little bit of flexibility in your head about like, okay, how are we going to solve this problem? Right. It's not always obvious. And so in our case, we started with the problem of like stuff is too complicated. The whole computer industry is making things hard for no good reason. Like 20 years ago, we weren't doing that, or like it hadn't set in as much as it had. Like you could have a 2-person team building stuff and build like a full on product, or you could have. My favorite example is like back in the 1990s, Microsoft Access was really popular. And I was in high school and doing some consulting work for a local computer store. And I went by places where like the front receptionist had built the inventory tracking system for their business 10 years ago. The receptionist was long gone, but people were just like poking at this inventory
What was
system.
Microsoft Access? Actually, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you see, I'm showing my age, right? Microsoft Access is a visual database editor, right? So it's if you can think of it sort of like Excel, except that instead of just building sheets, you like put together tables, and then you could put together little forms that are like drag and drop that like let people edit the forms and tie these tables together. It was really, really elegant system in that super non-technical people could build real database apps. This was like before the web days. The web basically killed Access. Once upon a time, when we all used to go into offices, the internet was not that popular. If you wanted to do the database, it was not surprising to have to go into a machine at the office and like use an app that you installed on your computer, right? Over time, that model went away, but like weirdly, nobody built the Microsoft Access of the future, right? It still doesn't exist today. Everything is harder now. Like everything, if you want to build an app, you need a team of people. You need to like start a startup.
It's like everything is like built for scale. I guess that was your original
Everything's
point.
built for scale, right? It's so hard to build an app that now you have to amortize the cost over like 1 million users in order to make it worthwhile to build the thing. Versus like Microsoft built Access and Visual Basic around the same time, right? And then like one receptionist could, in their spare time, could build an entire inventory app for your business, right? That doesn't exist anymore because technology makes things too hard to do. Or we've decided culturally to do it the hard way.
Tangent, but does AI change this, like with Lovable and all this kind of stuff that's happening that lets people just build apps, with language basically?
I think the dream is yes. I think the reality is no. And so what I think we can get there. We can get to a world where that can be that good again. But the thing holding everybody back, and I guess this ties back to the Tailscale story, is like, well, what is the reason that it's hard to build stuff now? Right? And the reason it's hard to build stuff is the internet, right? If you don't build something good and yet you publish it on the internet, somebody's going to break into it and ruin everything, right? It's like stomp on your sandcastle. And there's no way to stop that happening without like building a big team who's going to spend all their time building production systems and doing security and doing like intrusion detection. And what about backups and blah, 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 until like 90% of your work isn't building your app anymore. It's just boilerplate. So Tailscale says, what if you could just build apps and not put them on the public internet, right? What if it was more like the world of like the 1990s where there was no internet and this like Microsoft Access app, which had lots of features, but was certainly not secure, right? But it didn't matter it wasn't secure because only the employees of your business were allowed to touch it, right? What if you just created a virtual private network which is what
Right.
VPN stands for,
Right.
where you could host your own stuff and not have all these intruders come in. If you could do that, then there's no modern Microsoft access, but LLMs can do that part, right? Like LLM, please throw me together a crappy app, and we know that there's nobody looking at security and it's probably full of holes, but like who cares? It does its job, right? Slap this thing into my private network. It doesn't matter that it's full of holes, right? So I can see that world coming true. The default world where people like ask an LLM to slap something together and then they publish on the public internet, it doesn't
Further
seem like
away.
a very good idea to me.
Right.
Right? Like, yes, you can do that, but you're going to get like your stuff broken into in the next 10 seconds. And that has happened multiple times, right? Where people are like, hey, I just started a cool startup that did this. And it turns out that you like pasted in a public key automatically from the LLM that belonged to somebody else for some tool because it just happened to know the key to access this database. And everything was working until the person is like, hey, why is my key in your app, right? And shuts it down. Like crazy things like that are just not acceptable in the real world.
So I took you on this tangent, but back to the storyline, I guess. So you want to do something small, and you were talking about kind of two different ways, of finding problems, either a set of people that have a problem or a specific problem that you can solve.
So the problem we started with, of course, is like, look, I want to do simple things. It's hard to do the simple things. And we started just like talking to various people we knew in various businesses and saying like, what do you think about this problem? I bet you have this problem because everybody has this problem. Tell us about the problems you have, right? And it rapidly turned out that like the most common, what I would call category of problems they have, or what I call connectivity and security. Connectivity is like, how do I get the people on my team to be able to even connect to the thing I built? Right? And security is how do I get people who are not on my team to not be able to connect to the thing that I built? And if you're deploying a dashboard, people who have done this at a company, they know that like 90% of the work is somehow those two things. And then the remaining 10% is actually making the dashboard. And then this just turned out over and over and over again, like authentication, logins. What happens if I forgot my password? Where do I put the login database? How do I open the firewall port? How do I get a DNS name? How do I get an IP address? How do I where should I host it? All these things are not building the dashboard.
And is this like talking about dashboard, for example, like this is for people that want to build their own versus let's say use a Tableau or Clipfolio or whatever, or even for those people?
Well, even if you're using Tableau, then you have the problem of like, okay, it's in a SaaS, so presumably they handle all the security stuff. How do I get the data into it, right? Well, now it's hard, right? So now I've got to build a whole internal system that imports data into Tableau. Or, and I don't think Tableau can do this, but some vendors can do this, I can have Tableau like call into my network and query my database directly. But now where's my database? Is my database on the public facing internet? That's not a very good idea, right? So now I'm spending all my time securing where I put my database and how I secure it, right? So it's all the same problems. Like how do I connect thing A to thing B so that I can do thing C?
The challenge as I think through it for me, I'm like, it's such a broad problem. There's so many different kind of instantiations of this problem that so many things that people could want to build that they would want this kind of connectivity to. So what's the next step after people tell you, yeah, sure, I'd love to build like little simple apps, but it's too hard. I don't do it. What are you trying to kind of get out of those conversations?
I think we learned a lot about the structure of the problem by having those conversations. The one that finally put it all into focus was the company that turned into our first customer, which is a bank in Canada. I happen to know the CEO of this bank from like just previous rovings in the business world. And when I talked to him, he said, okay, Avery, I have a problem. We have Windows client server banking app, and it does not support two-factor authentication. And so my problem is this banking app is probably never going to support two-factor authentication because it's not a web app. It's a native Windows client app. It's really hard to tie that into modern 2FA systems. But I need to because otherwise like our core banking system is not protected. So my options are like replace the core banking system, which will cost millions of dollars, or do something creative. Avery, do you have something creative? And I said, well, what you could do is you could move the servers for this banking software onto a separate network, right? Even if that separate network is technically like in your back office, right? Your front office and back office could be on separate networks. And then to get into that network, you have to use a VPN that ties into your identity system and requires you to do two-factor authentication. Then just to connect to the server, you had the two-factor authentication so that the server itself doesn't have to do that stuff. And so, when I proposed this, I'm like, oh, so I will help you out. I'll just like go find a VPN that meets these characteristics, plop that into your system. We'll move on. I did you a favor. You pay me some money and I'll go.
Oh, this wasn't like a Tailscale thing. This was almost like an on the side.
It started from a Tailscale conversation. But I'm like, well, this doesn't sound like a product I would build. It sounds like something I will just go find for you and we'll buy off the shelf and help you deploy and off we go.
And in their case, this was an app that their employees would use, or the public facing?
Yeah, it was. So yeah, it is a banking app for their employees. So
Okay,
like,
yeah,
you know, they've
internal.
got
Makes sense.
bank tellers and stuff, right? So every bank, if you go in there, they've got computers doing things. Same idea, but the system needed two-factor authentication. So the problem is I went and I looked for this VPN that matched these characteristics. So it can talk to like Microsoft Azure login. It can do two-factor authentication. You can leave it on all the time because it has to be on all the time. You're happy to run it even when you're in the office, which is not like a normal VPN. Normally, you only use it when you're remotely, but like it needs to run in the office, not to degrade performance, and also not interfere with traffic that's not to your banking app. And like, how hard can this be? This is like basic networking in my head, right? It turned out there was nothing that works like that.
I mean, all the VPNs I know of are just to like get access to Netflix, or not Netflix anymore, but Disney Plus or.
Yeah, as a sidebar, there's two kinds of VPNs. There's what we call, people call it, which is a funny name, privacy VPNs or consumer VPNs, which is exactly for that. Like they route your traffic somewhere else so you can get access to Netflix in other countries or whatever. And then there's the original meaning of virtual private network, which is your stuff is on a private network even when you're not physically there, right? Which is what corporations use. But in any case, neither of those tools existed to solve the problem for my banker friend. And so we ended up like, okay, well, I could build you one of these. There's this new thing called WireGuard. It just came out. It's a super reliable, super simple VPN, so it'll be perfectly fine to leave on all the time. We can run it only to your banking app. And then we just need to build a little key generator for it that ties into two-factor authentication. So we like threw that together over a few days, and we built it for them. And they really loved it. It's like, hey, this solves their problem. The auditors are pleased. The security is really good. The user experience is really good.
You literally saved millions of dollars.
Exactly. It was like, hey, we don't have to
Crazy
replace our
ROI.
system.
Crazy.
right?
In a couple days. Not bad.
Yeah, that's great. And that's when, as founders, we're like, hey, maybe we're onto something. And then a few months later, COVID hit. And what was fun was that the bank was able to just tell all their employees, like, look, this desktop machine, our computer under your desk, take it home, set it up at home, and you'll have to do all your work from here for a few months. And it turned out a little longer than a few months, as we all know, right? But what was neat is that Tailscale, the prototype product, was on these machines. So like, because it was already a VPN behind the scenes to add this security feature, it turned out it didn't matter if they were in the office. So they just brought their computers home and everything kept working exactly like it was.
That's why.
And that was the other big is like, whoa, guys, what did we build here? This is really neat.
I mean, you enabled like remote, like work from home, remote, and still access like, very sensitive information without having to be like behind a firewall or whatever, without being like actually in the place.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so we realized we were kind of onto something. And so we started talking to people about, here's the thing that we built for this bank, which was still in prototype stage, right? This was still 2019, or well, I guess by then, 2020, COVID times.
Were you funded, by the way, or you were just doing this kind of bootstrapped at that point?
By the time we hit COVID, we had raised a little seed round from HeavyBit and Uncork.
How much did you raise?
That was $3 million USD. But that was basically on the basis of, at that time, it had rolled out to the bank. The bank had not yet sent all their employees home because COVID hadn't hit yet. But it seemed like we were onto something. And we were already talking to people about it. And we had adapted the same technology to be used for like a toy at home. And we've
by the
gotten
way,
a lot of interest on
maybe
like
walk
Hacker
me
News.
through this. It's maybe a stupid question, but like you talk about the two types of VPNs. The one to access, like the consumer one is obvious. We all understand that. In the other type of VPN that companies use, what was its main use case? Why didn't it not support this use case? Like, what's different about what Tailscale is supporting than them?
So it's at this point, it's really hard to remember because all our brains are like post-COVID now. But if you remember a world before, we all knew how to use Zoom, which was only like 5 years ago, right? I mean, I knew how. I'd been doing video calls because I like worked at Google and stuff. But a lot of people, it was like they had to learn how to do video conferencing for the first time because they suddenly got sent home from work. Similarly, like VPNs at that time, 5 years ago, the distant past, right, were really like a backup plan for when you're not in the office. And so you had it on your computer, but it like didn't need to work all that well because you only used it sometimes. And even if it failed while you were out of the office, it's like, not a big deal.
It's
I'll
your
just do
fault
it
for
when I
being
get
out of the
back.
office. Get back to the
Yeah, exactly. Like in a few days, I'll be back in the office. I'll just pick up where I left off. And so all of this stuff was like the quality expectations were low. The performance expectations were low. And when it didn't work, you just kind of dealt with it. right? And so the user experience was just awful. And so when I tried to apply one of these things to like, oh, this is going to be on all the time, even while you're sitting in the office, it's unacceptable, right? Like people would, demand to turn off the VPN unless it's absolutely needed right now. So making an app that you use 8 hours a day in the office require this VPN made everything else intolerable, right? And that was just the way the world was, right? And then everybody had to go home for COVID. And like as another sidebar, all of the VPN servers that these VPNs would connect to were suddenly overloaded because they provisioned them all for like a maximum of 20% of people being out of the office at a time, right? When it's suddenly 100%, you heard stories about these companies where they actually had to like, okay, your time to get to use the VPN is between 2 and 3 p.m. and your turn is going to be between 3 and 4 p.m. just to try to like spread the load out because the system was overloaded, right? Like all of this stuff, that's the way the world was 5 years ago.
So, but funny enough, remote seems to be a huge tailwind, but this all started with 2FA. So was that a specific problem for that bank, or was that also this multi-factor authentication? Was that also related to the way VPNs worked?
So multi-factor authentication, it was really compelling for this bank at the time. And well, VPNs have not evolved very much, ignoring again, consumer VPNs. Corporate VPNs have not really changed very much in like 25 years, right? And so traditionally you had to deploy like special keys for your VPN that are completely separate from your login process. Because again, it's hard to believe, but like SSO and like single, login with Google, login with Facebook, login with Apple, like didn't exist 20 years ago. And so you had to do like all kinds of weird stuff just to manage usernames and passwords. It was pretty uncommon for like multiple apps to share the same login. You'd have to like create usernames and passwords on every single website, which many people still do today. But whenever you have the chance to click the login with Google or login with Apple button, do that instead. It's so much more secure; it'll blow your mind.
I do it anyways because it's easier and I forget passwords.
It's
but
easier.
It's good.
It's easier and it's more secure. And people are really resistant because it's like too good to be true. It's like Google must be trying to screw me because I clicked login with Google. It's like no, they're not. Just click the button, guys. Anyway, all this stuff didn't exist. And so VPNs that existed at the time required this entire IT provisioning process where every new computer you might want to run the VPN on, you had to get a key from IT, you had to get it signed from IT. There was a whole security, like certificate authority thing. Like all of this was a mess. And so two-factor authentication, again, relatively recent thing, didn't work into any of this. And to do the two-factor authentication, what are you going to do? You've got this machine key the IT team's already deployed to your machine. How do you do two-factor with that? Like, what are you two-factoring against? It was a whole big problem. Right? So a VPN that just fundamentally only uses your corporate SSO login, and your corporate SSO login is set up to use two-factor authentication, was almost unheard of at the time.
So that gets you going, and then COVID happens, and you realize you're in a pretty interesting position because you can effectively power this work from home. What happens then? Like, do you start getting pull? Do you start going out to other enterprises or banks and trying to sell what you've built? Or is it ready for that?
Well, one of the realizations we as co-founders had is that we didn't want to be a pure enterprise software company, just because of like, that just doesn't sound that fun, which, is embarrassing maybe to say this, but just like, I don't know, it's like we wanted to build something that was like cool networking technology and like for people like us. And we were not a bank. We were a 3-person startup.
Well, you have to, it's a funny point, actually. You do have to, I find, this is the thing about startups. It's not, you can't just purely rely on emotion, but you also can't purely rely on like logic and just be purely analytical. You do have to find this Venn diagram between what the world needs and what you're well suited to build. So like it's kind of laughable, like, oh, we don't want to build that kind of company, but it actually is maybe more important than it might seem at the outset. Like when you're in it, you realize like you really want to, you need to want to do the thing you're doing because it's not gonna be easy no matter what.
Exactly. And so we had that in mind. We had also like written a blog post essentially about how this works, because we had the banking customer and we're just like, what, I like to write blog posts and get your name out there and see what happens as part of searching for product market fit, right? So we just described what our thing did. And then we put a little button on our website, like a waiting list, like enter your email address to join the Tailscale waiting list. And somehow this blog post got to the front page of Hacker News. And like hundreds and hundreds of people like filled their email address into the waiting list. And so the secret of the waiting list was there was not actually a waiting list. It just sent me an email every time somebody put their email address in this form. And so I've got an email box now with like hundreds of.
That's awesome.
And I stayed up for like 48 hours straight, just answering these emails. And like the way to add an account to Tailscale at the time, we didn't have an account system or anything. I authorize you by like literally modifying the source code and adding you to like a table, which we did over and over and over again. And then redeployed the
But you were at
server
least
with the new
ready to
software.
actually deploy it with them. I mean, it was messy and manual, but you did have a product for them.
Yeah, it was nominally a product. You could download the client and it would talk to our server with the hard-coded user IDs in it. And yeah, it did some stuff. And like, more than half the time it didn't work, right? But on the upside, as a CEO, I now had like an email personal relationship with each one of these people, right? And, they were Hacker News users. Nobody expected it to work right the first time, right? Because there was a blog post about this experiment that we were doing, right? And so they enjoyed debugging it with us, right? And so we like immediately started getting a lot of like one-to-one relationships with like nerds who wanted to play with stuff.
This is all post-COVID?
This was like around the time of COVID starting, basically, right? So this was before like the bank actually brought all the devices home. We had sort of started this like, I don't want to do too many more banks. Let's see what else we can do with this. Let's write a blog post and see what happens, right? And so all of this excitement was there, and we realized we were onto something. And that is when we ended up going down to California and we started talking to investors about raising our seed round. And the lead investor in our seed round, HeavyBit, were the ones who actually explained to us how this works. It's like, Avery, you can have the best of both worlds. You don't have to say no to banks, and you don't have to say no to people who want to play with it like you do, right? What you do is you build a product that is like really fun to use for free. And also they can bring it to work if they really like it. And when they bring it to work, you have to have a process eventually for being able to like sell it to executives and roll it out across the whole company like you did at the bank. But you don't have to worry about that part right now. You can build the part where they use it for fun, and then they can bring it to work and do small problems. And you can worry about moving up market later.
This is a classic like PLG motion.
Right. And so, yeah, exactly. And I think, again, it's hard to remember, but like 5 or 6 years ago, the word PLG was not that common. It was only starting to catch on.
That's true.
We hadn't even started calling it that yet. And so what I called it at the time was a hybrid bottom-up, top-down, right? And I think even today, I would say PLG doesn't really capture this hybrid nature of it. Like people imagine that PLG is always going to be like free plan, self-serve, and then we're done, which for a lot of products is the case. For Tailscale, we have the extra step of like, okay, once you start getting popular at this company, or once people start thinking bigger, you do need to like talk to executives and do a much more normal top-down process that doesn't seem PLG, but it was initiated by PLG. And when you're doing this top-down sale, it's only for people who contacted you in the first place. So they're very warm leads. And there's somebody in the company who is what we call an internal champion. Like they really want you to win, which is super different from like your sales team going out and calling people and trying to beg them for a meeting, right? But nevertheless, it's still a top-down sale.
I'm going to ask you for a small favor, a tiny little favor. In fact, it's not even, now that I think about it, it's not even really a favor for me. I'm actually trying to help you do a favor for you. Just hit the follow button. You won't miss out on the next episode. You'll see everything that we release. If you don't want to listen to an episode, you just skip it, but at least you don't miss out.
But I think PLG has evolved, at least in most cases that I know, on like if you're doing B2B PLG, most people have realized that, that's the best of both worlds. Like, why wouldn't you add enterprise sales once the product is working? You like the usage and retention. The driver of that to get an entire. I mean, you basically need it if the customers you're selling to are big enough. Like, you do need to go through their process and run that enterprise motion at the same time as you actually have like usage from bottom up.
Exactly. And all of this was sort of evolving over the last few years again, right? It's all pretty new. I like the term PLS, product-led sales, for describing the sort of like advanced version. But yeah, modern PLG, a lot of people are following the same thing. It's still pretty rare in the security and network infrastructure space, because very rarely do you get a good PLG motion working in like security, for the simple reason that like no person wants security voluntarily, right? Most of the time, security is something that's imposed on you that slows down your work. And so you're not going to like bring a security product to work most of the time.
Yeah, that's so true. In this case, is because they're building apps. So they're like, oh, I want to build this app. And then you need Tailscale to do it. Is that what's driving that PLG part of it?
Yeah. So the magic part of Tailscale is because we combine connectivity and security, which are not two things that normally go together. You use it because it makes connectivity super easy. Like, it's easier to build your dashboard because you had Tailscale. And coincidentally, it's also more secure, right? It goes back to the same thing, like log in with Google. It's like, you use it because it's easier. Like, why do I need to manage username and password? I'm just going to click this button. And then it turns out that it's actually way more secure than managing a username and password.
What, by the way, are some other things, especially in those early days, that you saw people building with Tailscale?
It can be hard to answer that question. Like Tailscale is such a, it's like a low level module you can use to do the thing that you were trying to do. How do you explain it? It's like, well, one of our customers, one of my favorite quotes, I asked them to describe what Tailscale does. And they said, it's like, Tailscale makes the internet work the way you thought the internet worked before you found out how the internet worked.
That's good.
Right? And what that means is, like, normally if I've got a phone and a laptop and I want them to be able to talk to each other, right? Even if they're on the same Wi-Fi, it's actually kind of annoying to make that work. Right? Like, what's the IP address of my laptop? I have to go like look it up, right? And if they're not on the same Wi-Fi, like forget it, right? And that's actually really weird because the original internet, the whole point of it was I can connect any device to any other device, right? And yet the way evolution has happened with NATs and firewalls and insecurity and logins and passwords and, you know, connect with Google and OAuth and everything else is like now almost impossible to connect one thing to one other thing, right? You have to always go to the cloud and then back from the cloud, and you're paying rent every time you do that. So Tailscale just makes that go away. Now my laptop has a name, right? It's IndiaNS automatically. My phone has a name. It's IndiaNS automatically. I can write a really simple web app that just like accepts an API call or lets me like navigate to a web page from my phone and do whatever I want, and it'll work.
But it literally doesn't go up, like it just goes direct to device.
Yeah, that's the magical like feature of this. It's partly WireGuard, it's partly some Tailscale magic sprinkled on top. But because of that, you can build anything you want, and it's hard to say you built it with Tailscale, because maybe you didn't even have to think about Tailscale. You're just like expecting the network to work correctly. And then you built something under the assumption that the network worked correctly and the attackers can't get in. And therefore,
for simple-minded people like me, like, can you, like, you know, Bluetooth is obviously device to device, but this is at a higher rate, like bigger stuff that you can move through, or what's
Bluetooth,
you know what I mean? Like
Bluetooth works if your two devices are like 3 feet from each other.
Yes, right.
It's not very fast, but it works into like those conditions. You can also do like, you know, if you've got Apple only devices and they're right next to each other, you can use something like AirDrop, right? Which behind the scenes is like generating a fake Wi-Fi network, and then two things join the same Wi-Fi network and send a file and then disconnect. But Tailscale works even when they're not right next to each other, right? That's kind of the magical thing, is like you no longer have to care where the devices are or what they're connected to. It'll use your Wi-Fi, it'll switch between Wi-Fi networks, it'll use your cellular connection, it'll use whatever in order to find the other device magically elsewhere on the internet.
And it'll get there, but it'll never actually go through a cloud in between. Got it. Okay.
Exactly. So it'll go through the internet, but it doesn't have to go like to Amazon and back. And if the two things are side by side, it won't even go out to the internet. They'll actually find each other side by side also. So you get the like best connections possible.
How did it go when you went down to California to raise that seed round? Was that relatively easy? Was there any friction? Did people just kind of get it?
I mean, the joke is in Silicon Valley, if you go asking for money, they'll give you advice. If you go asking for advice, they'll give you money. We actually went asking for advice. And most of the advice we got was like, hey, you're kind of ready for a seed investment. You should just raise some money. But yeah, I was looking for advice because we were torn between like, hey, it looks like we have something that would be great for enterprise. I don't really want to do enterprise, or not enterprise only. But we also have this thing that's kind of cool for like just developers to play with. That seems fun, but I have no idea how to monetize that, right? And HeavyBit was the one who explained to us sort of this nascent PLG concept. And they said they were really excited about it because they'd never seen someone do this in the infrastructure security space. But conceptually, it was the same. And we had demonstrated that we had the ingredients of both because people loved it and it worked at a bank to solve real problems that were worth money.
How many users more or less did you have like at that point? Do you remember? It was like 100 users, something like that?
It was probably in the hundreds-ish.
And how much did you end up raising?
We raised $3 million in the seed round.
Okay.
And I think our revenue was like, less than 100K. And it was from like 1.5 customers because they had gotten a second customer using something similar by that time.
But that $3 million, was that the same 3 million you mentioned before? Like this was your first funding? Okay, I see. This is your first funding. Okay. And what was the plan with that?
The plan with that was just like, hey, I think we're onto something. Let's make the product actually reliable. And see what happens if it's actually reliable. It was reliable in the specific banking scenario because they had a really, really well-defined situation, and we just made sure to fix all the bugs that related to that one situation. But as soon as you got the hundreds of people trying it with whatever, like more than half of those people were failing to like actually make the thing work for them.
So it was really just kind of product development. Like you figured there was a clear market here, there was a clear market need. You just need the product to work instead of 50% of the time, like closer to 100% of the time.
Yeah, exactly. So in the putting it in the product market fit context, I would say we had like idea market fit at that point, right? It's like clearly people wanted this to work, and it just mostly didn't.
And what about? I assume how long did it take between there and you had the product that you were like confident in?
The product is still not perfect 6 years later, right? I would still,
But confident,
I'd still love
confident,
to
not perfect, but you had confidence. Like, okay, this should work. Yeah.
I'm a person with a lot of confidence, so even that is not quite the right metric necessarily.
What would be the right? You know what I'm getting at. What would be the right?
So
metric
yeah. From the very beginning, Tailscale was something where if you understood where it works and where it doesn't work, you could deploy it successfully, right? The point we wanted to get past is the point where like most people who just downloaded Tailscale and started to play with it would have a successful experience. That took until we hired our first 2 employees in, I think, February 2020 after our seed round. And the first thing they did, the first things they did was they helped us open source the client software, which we'd always been intending to do and just hadn't gotten around to it. And we also added this function called DERP, which is like the fallback network. So when you can't get a direct connection, it would go through DERP and negotiate a connection like us through a slower path, which greatly increased the probability you're going to get something from like maybe 80% before, because we could get a direct connection about 80% of the time, and it just drops dead the other 20% to like basically 100% now, because that 20% would be covered by the fallback path. And that changed the behavior from like some people just had a terrible experience every time they tried it to probably everyone had a pretty good experience every time they tried it. And that's where you could say like, okay, if you have problem X, you should really try Tailscale and see if Tailscale solves that problem for you. So if that's the definition of confidence, then I guess maybe that's a good way of thinking about it. But it's just...
And that was when, more or less?
So we released DERP in April 2020. There were some bugs to fix. So I would say by like May or June 2020, things were like really rolling in the sense of like, if you tried it, you would be successful. And then we had the problem of like a lot of people who tried it, they're like, I have no idea what this thing does or what it's for, right? But that's a bit of marketing and documentation, positioning, etc.
How did you get people? Like you had the Hacker News post, which I'm sure brought a bunch of people at the beginning, but how did you market this in those early days?
In those early days, and for a long time, we did almost no marketing. Like this was something where like the people who got it just became like rabidly excited about it. And there was, whole aspects of just like, look, we paid attention to the people who emailed us and actually made sure they got answers, right? Is from the very first day when I was like manually signing people up, we just like, the founders were like answering tech support problems and working really hard to make sure that they had tech support answers, making the product like, the so-called time to wow. I don't know if you've heard that
of course
before, but like make sure, how many minutes is it from like deciding you want to use Tailscale to like, ooh, hey, this thing actually works. Like get that down to like a smallest number of minutes possible, and then give people a way to share it with their friends, right? And that was the number one way Tailscale spread, is just through word of mouth. And then yes, we kept on writing blog posts. We, for whatever reason, the early people at Tailscale are popular blog post writers that seemed to like, we would write something, it would often get to the front page of Hacker News. I still can't explain why that happens. It's really not a voting block, even though we're accused of that sometimes. It's just like, hey, I don't know why they like our content so much, but they do. And that helps a lot because Hacker News is like a lot of people who have a lot of friends that even if those friends don't read Hacker News. And so it spread pretty fast.
And your ICP was all like developers back then?
Yeah.
And they would just start using it, build something, share with their friends, tell them, hey, you can use this thing. And then it was really all just word of mouth that was kind of taking care of the early growth.
Exactly. And what was neat is some fraction of those people just started bringing it to work on their own. And it was not a high fraction, but it didn't really matter because the way Tailscale works, this is like, again, getting into the weeds a little bit, because Tailscale makes a direct connection between your devices. We don't have to pay for the bytes, right? It's kind of like obvious in retrospect, but because we don't have to pay for the bytes, all we're paying for is just a little service that helps your devices coordinate with each other. So we can offer Tailscale to a very large number of customers for free without it like bankrupting us. And then as long as some percentage of those people end up bringing it to work eventually and wanting to pay us, we've got a good business.
And do you have visibility into that? Like people who bring it to work?
Well, some visibility, because they log in with like their Gmail account when they're using it at home. They'll log into their corporate account when they're using it at work. So we don't 100% see exactly like which person brought it to work at what time. But you can kind of draw some estimated conclusions.
When did you start going back to the enterprise, like adding that enterprise motion again, kind of getting the second bank to do an enterprise-wide deal?
We still, even to this day, almost exclusively pursue like deals that are like incoming. So people who were like wanted to use Tailscale because they heard about Tailscale. It's kind of funny sometimes. Like one bank that we talked to, the CTO sent us an email saying like, "Hey, can I talk to your sales team about deploying Tailscale at my bank?" And we got on the call, and it's like, "Okay, how'd you hear about Tailscale?" Common question we ask everybody, and the answer is like, "My friend runs a network of Airbnbs. He uses Tailscale to manage that network. I was telling him about one of our networking problems, and he said, 'Oh, well, you should think about Tailscale for your bank.'" And so here we are, right? And so it's a really interesting process how that works. But if people really love your product, that kind of thing can happen.
But it's incredible to get like inbound, almost fully inbound enterprise deals is a wild place to be in.
It is definitely a wild place to be in. But that's, that is the sort of magic of Tailscale, is we put a lot of work into that flow and making sure everybody has a really great experience, and as many people as possible are exposed to the fact, because we ran into this problem for a while. It's like, oh, is Tailscale a toy because I can use it at home? Is it really enterprise ready? And it's like, look, our first customer was a bank.
Right.
But not everybody understands that. You just have to make sure that they're aware of all this like enterprisey stuff that's in there that you don't necessarily need to play with it at home. We didn't start the enterprise motion explicitly. What happened was this inbound interest. And so for the longest time, it was just the founders would answer these enterprise sounding inquiries and turn that into a sales call. And then we expanded to like hiring one or two salespeople whose job it was to like answer the incoming inquiries and try to find the pattern and try to optimize that. And eventually only at the beginning of 2023, 4 years into the life of the company, did we finally hire a head of sales.
How big were these like what's the average deal size back then?
It's so hard to talk about the average deal size at Tailscale because you get people paying like all companies all the way down to like $10 a month for 2 seats, all the way up to like tens of thousands of seats. And so you can talk about like what's the most effective deal size to steer toward the sales team versus try to steer them to continuing to do self-serve. But even that doesn't totally answer the question, because sometimes you want to steer them towards self-serve, but they really want to have a half-hour conversation just to understand that we're really humans before they spend a bunch of money. So it's very hard to answer that question.
Even in that first year, second year, like you were getting $100 deals and $100,000 deals and like $500,000 deals. Like it was just all over the place.
I would say the first year we didn't have any $500,000 deals. It was more in the tens of thousands of dollars for the most part, like smaller companies. Even today, we're like only now getting into like the first $1 million deals, because we're intentionally like, we start small, we're moving towards enterprise, we're scaling up over time, right? But most of the deals are, this will always be the case, because most of the deals will always be tiny, and smaller numbers of them will be larger, kind of for obvious reasons, right? The power law.
And then like late 2020, once the product you feel is like working pretty well for most cases, what's like the main KPI you're thinking about? Is it revenue? Is it usage, retention, like referrals? Like what's the thing that you're obsessing about?
I guess a combination of usage plus retention are the most important things. Like Tailscale has a very high retention rate generally. People who use it almost always stick with it. I would like the retention rate to be even higher. Usually when we dig into like why people didn't stick around, it's often like, oh, I was trying to do X and Tailscale doesn't do X. And we're like, wait a minute, yes, it does. You didn't find the information about how Tailscale does X, right? So that's like our fault for not talking to you sooner or whatever, right? So we can get better at that. Sometimes there's bugs. We need to get rid of the bugs so that people don't have a frustrating experience. There's always the long tail of like just networking is networking. So there's all kinds of weird things you can run into, right? And we're just trying to eliminate all of those. And then on top of that, if they have a good experience, if they're using the product, if they're retained, then it's just a matter of like, okay, are you so excited about Tailscale that you tell your friends, right? And the more they tell their friends, we have this thing we call the word of mouth multiplier, right? The higher that multiplier is, the faster Tailscale can grow. And to do that, you just have like super high customer satisfaction, right? It's kind of like obvious.
What is that? Like, how do you calculate that? The word of mouth multiplier?
Let's see. This is something you can actually find websites about this. But roughly speaking, you want to know how many customers. How do you think of it? A good way to do it is like how many people visit your website that are not already customers, that are coming in through organic sources, as a fraction of how many people come to your website that are already customers. There's a few different ways to do it based on that. But like if you're doing web advertising, it's kind of cheating. If you're doing SEO, that's a different path. But if they're just showing up, as often happens, like most of the people visiting our website show up because they Googled the word Tailscale. Like, well, how does that happen?
Wow.
Right? It's because someone told them about Tailscale.
Were you doing any SEO or not much?
I mean, our blog posts count as SEO, documentation counts as SEO. We were not at the time certainly doing any kind of like consistent.
It wasn't like a strategy, like what
SEO.
long tail words, draft this.
Yeah,
or that,
it was one
et
of those
cetera, et
things
cetera.
we knew we should do, and we occasionally inserted a few words into our blog posts and stuff, but we weren't doing very reliably.
And how fast did things grow, like through, let's say, 2021?
I mean, pretty fast. So we've been more than 100% doubling revenue every year since we started. Similarly with user count, similarly with number of active nodes. And so it's growing really, really fast, and it's continuing to grow really, really fast. And almost all of that can be traced to like word of mouth.
How fast did you hit like $1 million in ARR, for example?
We hit $1 million in ARR during 2021, I believe.
So it's about a year after the product was like fully fleshed out.
Yeah, we raised our Series B like not too long after hitting that milestone. So it was like relatively small number of millions in revenue at that time.
When did you what was your Series A?
Series A was in 2020. So it was actually a fairly fast follow. It was like September 2020 or so.
Oh, wow. Okay. It was like 6 months later.
Maybe
like
9 months
9
later.
months. Okay. 6 to 9 months. So Series Seed was like 3 million. Then 9 months later, it was how much was the Series A?
That one we raised 12 million.
12. Okay. And then you hit a few million ARR, and then the Series B came.
Yeah. And that was at the height of the market. And we had sort of been warned by our investors to expect a decline in the market. So like the word was like, Avery, if you're planning to raise any money in the next 2 or 3 years, you should probably do it right now. And I took that advice seriously. It turned out to be really good advice.
But the business kept kind of going up and to the right after. So it's not, I mean, a lot of the
Yeah.
people actually suffered. Doesn't seem like you did.
Yeah. I mean, investors have told me it's like, sometimes their favorite segment is security products because security seems to be recession proof. Cross your fingers, never know what kind of recession is going to get caused next. But like people can't just like, oops, I guess I don't need security right now, and cut their costs, right?
When did you feel like personally, when did you feel like you had found true product market fit?
True product market fit, I think, like I said, early on we had what I would call idea market fit. Product market fit for me is when people are showing up and like just buying the thing almost without you having to do anything and like demanding it. And I would say 2021-ish time period was when we started seeing that. Our investors have since then made a distinction between like product market fit and maybe enterprise product market fit. It's like, okay, how big are these? And again, it's not actually like a threshold between like enterprises and not enterprises. It's actually like going up market. And we keep finding new product market fit with bigger and bigger customers, if that makes sense. Each scale size of customer you reach has different requirements of the product, and we're just like slowly working our way into those higher and higher levels. So over time, I would say we didn't really get to enterprise product market fit until maybe late 2023-ish or mid 2024, at least for like really big deals.
Did you ever feel, this is the opposite question, like things actually just maybe wouldn't work out, like they were just going to fail?
No, I don't. I think with Tailscale, we actually never really had that experience. I know it's funny to say, and I know almost every company, they wish they were that lucky, right? But we just like bumbled into like the idea market fit was so strong. It's like, all we need to do is just build this thing and people love it, right? So there's got to be something here. And it's just like, if, the curve just kept on going. At this point, the only question is like, okay, well, how fast is it going to keep going up? Right? Are we going to like saturate or something? What does that saturation look like?
Exactly.
Do we need to keep layering on more kinds of sales and marketing and product features to make sure this curve keeps growing? But it's like, it's already kind of a success. So the question is like, how much more success?
How big of a success? So last question, you've built a few startups. I'm sure you talk to early stage founders all the time. Like, what, if you had one piece of advice for early stage founders, what might that be?
I guess most important thing is just you actually have to listen when you talk to people about the problems they're trying to solve and what your product might be able to do. Because especially in the early days, like the thing you currently built almost certainly does not solve the problem, right? And the most important thing is like listen really carefully. They can describe their problem in a lot of detail and like figure out how you can help them solve their problem better. Right. And then you have to choose like, okay, does this person need anything like my product? No, well, that's too much of a distraction. I can't take them. Or, oh, that's almost right. I should adapt my product to match them. And in the early days, like you really have to adapt a lot and you really just have to talk to people, and like connections to individuals is so much more valuable than like measuring a lot of stuff, right? I love numbers, I love charts, I love data, but like when you're small, like anecdotes are absolutely the king. And the only way to get good anecdotes is like a real one-to-one conversation, either over email or something, or ideally a call, right? But it makes such a huge difference. Just like if you're building something for somebody, that means you've got product market fit for one person, right? And that's way better than product market fit for 0, right? And you just like go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16, and then now you're off to the races.
Perfect. Well, we'll stop it there. Avery, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. It's been great.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
You remember like the first person who told you about Bitcoin, the first person who told you about Uber? You want to be that person because being first is cool. So be a cool person and tell your founder friends. Send it to them on WhatsApp, put it in a WhatsApp group, put it on a Slack channel, let people know about the show, let people know about this episode. Don't let somebody else beat you to the punch and share it with your founder friends first. Remember what Ricky Bobby said. If you ain't first, you're last.